Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast. John Schmeelk with you. Today's guest is Dane Brugler from The Athletic. But first, a reminder, the Giants Huddle is part of the Giants Podcast Network presented by Investors Bank, which you can find on giants.com/podcast, the Giants mobile app, and your favorite podcast platforms. Now let's get to our guest. He is Dane Brugler. He's the lead draft analyst from The Athletic. And we've had a lot of guys on here, Dane. We focused on the first round with them a lot. So we're going to try to focus on day two guys with you and your latest intel. And the reason why is that you are the author, I'm old school, I printed it out, of The Beast.
That's beautiful.
Look how thick it is. Look at the spiral. How many player prospect profiles do you have in there, Dane?
415.
Yes, so who better to dig deep than the guy who did 415 draft prospect profiles? And, of course, you get that for free with your Athletic subscription. It is the price of admission on its own. It's worth it. Make sure you guys go check it out. And, Dane, just to pass it on to you, my guys here, and I'm talking about the David Deals and Sean O'Hara's of the world, when they ask me for their draft guide, you're the one they ask me for because They say your detail into technique in there is something that they don't – like other people write, oh, they have bad hands technique. And David Deals like, what does that mean to me? It means nothing. But he likes the detail you go into. Just want to say everybody does appreciate your hard work.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. It's a year-round project. A lot goes into it. So hopefully people check it out. 0% chance you'll be disappointed with everything that's in there. Yes,
it is. You will have it by your side when you watch the draft, and all the information you need, background, technique, stats, testing numbers, everything is in there for each prospect. Make sure you guys go there and check it out. Okay, so let's get to Dane Brugler here. And Dane, let's start here. The Giants go at 11. What they do will be very much dependent on what happens in front of them. I think Giant fans have their eye on some of the top offensive players in the draft, so I'll start here. You don't have to, list the probability, but Sewell, Slater, the four top playmakers, who has the best chance of being there at 11, in your opinion?
Probably Devontae Smith, wide receiver, Alabama. I think there will be enough teams in front of in the top 10 that have maybe a few concerns just about the size. And when you have, these talented pass catchers at the top with those four, with Jamar Chase and Jalen Waddle and Kyle Pitts, something like that size and Devontae Smith being an outlier, that's enough to separate him from, even though I think that the consensus he's a really good player. I don't know how you could watch the film and come to any other, conclusion other than he's a really good player. Also factor in that he started double-digit games each of the last 3 years. Toughness, competitiveness off the charts. I'd say he's tougher than most 225-pound receivers in this draft. So, there's a lot going for Devontae Smith. But again, when you're trying to nitpick, when you're trying to, just find something to separate these guys, him being the outlier size-wise could end up being what a lot of teams use. And so I think he has the best chance of being there at 11.
So I guess this is my question for you then. If Smith's the guy that's there, is there an argument, in your opinion, to go defense over Smith, or is the value on Smith simply too high to pass up in that spot?
Yeah, and I think it's a question that you're going to get different answers depending on who you talk to. Like for me, for example, Devontae Smith's a top 10 player in this draft. That's where I would go. I don't think there's a defensive player that is a clear upgrade for me for this roster. A guy that's going to come in and be that true impact player that I think Devontae Smith could be on offense. And when you're picking top 11, you need to come away with impact players. You don't need to necessarily look at, okay, what's my top need or what would I really love to add to this team and reach on a player. You need to go with talent, a guy that is going to make an impact, even if maybe you answered some of those needs through free agency with a Kenny Golladay. So it's an interesting spot at 11. I think there's a good chance maybe that's where we start to talk about pass rushers coming off the board. I think we know this team would love to get better on the edges, guys that can rush the passer. This is a unique class where there's not that top 10 pass rusher this year. But at 11, that's where I think the conversation starts, and maybe which one the Giants could look for at that point. Could a Rashawn Slater get there at 11? I think it's possible, especially because opinions are split about tackle, guard. There are several teams that view him as a guard picking in that top 10 range. So and a lot of those teams would not pick a guard that early. So at 11, it's possible that Slater could be there, and I think he'd make a ton of sense, even if you're looking to slide him in at guard. You're looking for a really good player. Rashawn Slater is definitely that.
I'll get back to the edge rushers. Want to stick on the O-line. In your 7-round mock that you did on The Athletic, you had Elijah Vera Tucker there, which I thought was interesting. We just did a mock draft on Big Blue Kickoff Live. We traded down 4 spots and grabbed Tucker. It was actually 5 spots to the Cardinals. And what's your sense? Do teams think he can stick out at tackle? Do they think he is primarily a guard, talking to people around the league? What's the take on him?
You talk to some coaches and they do think that, watching his film, 2020 film, that he can do it. But I think overall his body of work, because he's only a 2-year starter and majority of those starts came inside of guard. He only started 6 games at left tackle and he played well for the most part. But, you can tell, throw on the Oregon tape and you can see that, the lack of length shows up. He could survive out there. And I think in a pinch, you can play him there. But to maximize his ability and what he does best, his strengths as a player, move him inside. And I think you've got a guy that could be a Pro Bowl guard. He's 6'4.5", 310 pounds, 32 and an 1/8 inch arms. It's, we could talk about arm length and, how relevant that is for offensive linemen. The fact of the matter is it's hard to find tackles in the NFL, 32 and an 1/8 inch arms. You can find some just under 33. You're not going to find many right at 32 or 32 and an 1/8. So that's pretty rare. But plugging him inside the guard, it's you can make an argument to the Zach Martin conversation. A guy that could stay outside, but to maximize his strengths as a player, move him inside to guard, and I think he's got Pro Bowl potential there.
Now, I think the interesting question now, because Dane, unlike most drafts, this is a deep tackle class, right? And a lot of those tackles that you can
offensive line, I'd say in general, is deep this year.
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of those guys too on day 2. They play tackle in college. Maybe you can leave them out there, but a lot of these guys could transition well to guard too. Who are your favorite guys that kind of fit that description that could be a pick at 42 for the Giants if they forego that offensive lineman or just don't have the opportunity to take one at 11?
Yeah, I think you look at this class and there's a few of these guys that played tackle in college, but you probably project them best inside. Like a guy like Liam Eichenberg, I think he can move him inside to guard at a Notre Dame. Some look at Dylan Radins out of North Dakota State, and he has, I think, the mirroring skills to stay outside. But if you move him inside, I think that could really maximize what he does as a player. Jalen Mayfield from Michigan, another one of those guys who could survive outside, but 6'5", 326 pounds. He the size that he is, doesn't have super long arms. He's 32 and 5/8 inch arms. I think when you look at his strengths, power, once he gets his hands on you, his ability to work in smaller spaces as opposed to trying to protect the corner. Jalen Mayfield could be that guy once you get to day 2. So Alex Leatherwood, I don't know that he's going to fall that far, but he would be in that conversation as well. Some see him as a tackle, some see him as a guard. But there's several options, those types of players who could realistically be there, especially with that early 2nd round pick.
And then if you're looking at straight guards, Dane, you could probably wait to the top around 3, and you're going to have a pick of a few guys that are pretty good, right?
Absolutely. This is a strong offensive line class. I think you could conceivably wait until round 4 and still feel pretty good about the guy you're getting. We saw that last year with a guy like, Jonah Jackson, where he was drafted by the Lions, came in, had a pretty good rookie campaign. This year with guys like Deontay Brown out of Alabama, Aaron Banks, Notre Dame, Jackson Carman, Clemson, Robert Hainsey, Notre Dame, who's a tackle. He's going to move inside. I think all of those guys, probably don't go inside the top 50. They're somewhere likely early 3rd round. Maybe that stretches a little bit. Trey Smith from Tennessee is a really intriguing player because he's 6'5.5", 320 pounds. Moves pretty well. His tape is a little sloppy. It just some plays you watch him and you think, okay, this guy, he's bouncing bodies all over the field at the SEC level. But then you watch the next play and, he just gets, bullied at the point of attack because his leverage isn't right. His hands aren't right. And he's not on the same page. Plus the blood clots issue in his past. Trey Smith's a tough guy to figure out, but high risk, high reward type of player that maybe you roll the dice on in the early 4th round.
So you mentioned pass rusher before. What's the sweet spot there? Is it a trade down from that 15 to 20 area if you can manage that, or do you even wait to the top of the 2nd round, see if Joe Tryon drops, see if Joseph Osai drops, Peyton Turner, one of those guys? What's the sweet spot to try to find that edge rusher, and who are the guys you like in that sweet spot?
Yeah, I think that if you trade back from 11 to, say, the late teens or even into let's say one of the quarterbacks are there and, you've got a team like The Bears at 20. And even if you go into the 20s, I think you could still feel pretty confident about the edge rusher options that will be there. To me, Azeez Ojulari out of Georgia is the top pass rusher. And, none of these pass rushers are a lock to go in the top 20. I think we'll see one or two sneak in there, whether that's Ojulari or Pay. Maybe Jalen Phillips if the medicals of a team is just if they're buying in on the medicals and they take that chance. But it's also conceivable that those guys could still be available in the 20s. Ojulari to me is the top guy, 6'2", 250 pounds. Doesn't look like the biggest guy, but 34.5-inch arms. It's almost the best of both worlds because he has the length of a 6'5" player, but 6'2" stature, so he can play low, play with leverage, play underneath blocks. He can dip and rip around the corner. So there's a lot to like about Ojulari, the athletic ability, his instincts. He can play the run, can play the pass, can drop. There's a lot to like about what he offers to your team. Kwity Paye, 6'2.5", 260. I think that we're still waiting for him to play his best football. At Michigan, they didn't let him just pin his ears back and go. And I think if a team lets him do that, that sack production will go up. And then Jalen Phillips, who I mentioned at Miami, who, at one point at UCLA had to retire because of the concussions. And that's obviously a bright red flag. But he transfers to Miami, starts all 10 games last year, and looked healthy all season. And you could argue he's the best on-field talent among these pass rushers because he has a plan. He understands what he's doing with every single movement, with how he uses his hands, power, quickness. He can play the run, and he can just beat you in different ways. And you see flashbacks of Nick Bosa, of Ryan Kerrigan, of some of these established pass rushers in the NFL. And so it's easy to buy into Jalen Phillips, but that's going to be strictly a medical pick and just where you feel comfortable taking a chance on him. And so all these guys, you trade back from 11, and I think that you feel like you're in good shape to get one of them. If they do, maybe trade up in the second round, then I think Gregory Rousseau becomes a realistic possibility. Maybe he goes in the first round as possible, but I think there's also very possible he goes in the early second round. And, we talk about Jamar Chase, Penei Sewell, some of these opt-outs, they didn't need to play another snap for us to really understand who they are as prospects. Gregory Rousseau is kind of the opposite, where, he played safety and wide receiver most of his life. He outgrows those positions, moves to defensive line as a senior in high school, and goes to Miami, misses an entire first year with an injury. And then last year, 2019, he, really just emerges as this big presence rushing off the edge, second in the FBS in sacks behind Chase Young. But then he opts out this past year. So really, we're just going based off his redshirt freshman year. And there's things to like about him. He's almost 6'7", 6'6.5", 266 pounds. You love the length. You love his get off. Not a very bendy rusher, not the most instinctive player, but he's young and you feel like he's going to get better and better. So because of those reasons, he could still be there in the late first, but I think there's also a good chance that somewhere early second round, maybe a team like the Giants could move up and get him.
How about that next group, like the Joe Size, the Peyton Turners? Are you then at the point where you maybe reaching a little bit of 42? Because I think all those guys are wiped out by the time you get to the third round, right? At 42,
yeah,
is there value, or are you going to find somebody, or is there going to be somebody that's going to have a significantly higher grade on your board than that next group of guys?
No, I mean, I think they're all in that early to mid second round range. Talk about Carlos Boogie Basham out of Wake Forest, 6'3.25", 275 pounds. I posted this on Twitter the other day, but his testing numbers are almost identical to Rashawn Gary, who was a top 15 pick a couple of years ago. And with Basham, the motor just doesn't quit with him. He can play inside, can play outside, gives you that inside-outside versatility. So I think Boogie Basham would be an interesting fit. Joseph Osai, he's still patching things together, just about how to be a coordinated pass rusher. But in terms of pursuit player, he is the best pursuit player in this draft. He does not turn it off. The motor never quits with him. 6'4", 256 pounds, 16 tackles for loss last year. There's just a lot to like about his effort and how he turns that into production. But he's still growing as a pass rusher, and still figuring things out. Because of that, that's why he is looked at on the second round. And then Peyton Turner, I don't think it'd be too early if you consider him in that early to mid second round range. 6'5.5", 270 pounds. You love the length, almost 35.5-inch arms. And he's high cut. And so that will work against him at times. but another guy where the motor just doesn't quit. I mean, he will make some plays on film. He has no business making these plays, but because the effort and the hustle are nonstop, he's able to make them. So, a guy that I think, is yet to play his best football, really turned it on as a senior and that he was healthy. His junior year, he was battling some injuries. So as a senior, looked fresh, looked rejuvenated, and kind of showed the type of player that he is and put himself into that second round discussion.
How about the cornerbacks? Let's take those top 5 that we all think are going to go maybe in the first round. We'll see. And we'll kind of slide them off into our little silo here. So Farley, Newsome, Horn, Surtain, Samuel. Let's kind of slide those guys aside because I don't think any of those 4 or 5 are going to be there when the Giants go at 42, right?
Agree.
That next group, talking to people the last month, Dane, there's a bunch of guys in that set, and front offices are all over the place. Give me your take on that next group and whether or not you're hearing the same stuff.
Yeah, it depends on what you're looking for. What do you value at the position? You've got on one hand a guy like Elijah Molden out of Washington, who's a nickel corner, and he's probably a nickel corner only, and that nickel safety that position. But he's really good at that one position. So I think if that's what you're looking for, he could be in the mix. But most of these corners are the tall, long, speedy guys who have some type of flaw in their game. But, the size speed combination is really, really intriguing. You look at both of the Georgia corners, Eric Stokes, 6'1", 195 pounds, legit 4.2 speed. He's a guy that the scheme versatile traits are there, body control, patience, footwork. There's a lot that, you can look to and say, okay, I'll bet on these traits. But in terms of play recognition, instincts, he's still growing in that respect, recognizing routes and anticipating. That's an area where he needs to get better. His teammate, Tyson Campbell, 6'1", 195, 4'3" athlete, just remarkable traits. But a guy that when you watch his film, SEC quarterbacks were not shy throwing at him. And, he's always in phase, but he struggles to get his head turned, to find the football, make plays on the ball. Only 11 passes defended in 33 games played. That's not the ratio that you want. And so at some point you're going to bet on those traits, but he needs to be a better football player, needs to be better locating the football and making plays on the football if he's going to stay on the field in the NFL. Kelvin Joseph from Kentucky, most of his issues I would say are off the field and just making sure that he's dialed in. I don't know that, you look at the Giants and everything that happened with DeAndre Baker. I don't know if, Kelvin Joseph is going to be a guy they'd be interested in because of that. And then into, it's still in the second round. We're still talking about Ifeatu Melifonwu from Syracuse or Aaron Robinson, UCF, Paulson Adebo. Some teams like him starting in the second round. So if you wanted to wait until the second round to get your corner, I think you're going to have plenty of options there. And because the volume of players, there's a pretty good chance that you could wait till the third as well, just because there's only so many landing spots. 1 or 2 of those guys could fall to you in the third round.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting class. And somebody told me too that linebacker, Dane, is a pretty deep class. I know Micah Parsons could be an option in that first round. But after that, maybe Nick Bolton round 2. And after that, some people tell me they really do like this inside linebacker off-ball class.
Yeah, it's not a bad class. I don't know that it would be a strength of this group or of this year's draft, but I think it's probably somewhere in the middle where it's not a weakness. It's not below average. I don't want to call it above average. Both Ohio State linebackers there in the third round make some sense. Baron Browning, 6'3", 245. Some look at him as maybe even a designated pass rusher just because the traits are outstanding. The size is there. I was going to ask you, what position does he play, right? Because he was kind of used all over the place. Right. I think he's best as a Sam because you can, throw on the Penn State tape and he's covering Pat Freiermuth. He can drop in space and cover. He has those athletic traits. Really, it comes down to his mental development and just he needs to get better with his keys and staying ahead of plays, ahead of blocks, instead of being a little too reactive. But again, another guy, you look at the traits and you say, okay, we're going to bet on that. His ability, a 4'5" athlete at 245 pounds, 33.5-inch arms. 6'7", 3 cone, which really, shows just, his change of direction and how good he is at redirecting and making plays. So I think he's going to be high on the list for teams on day 2. And then his teammate, Pete Werner, who a little bit of the opposite in some ways, 6'3", 238. I don't know that he necessarily he doesn't have the same physical traits. And I don't know that he necessarily has a one area that you would point to and say, okay, this is what he does better than everybody else, or this is what he is really, really good at. But he is solid across the board. He's one of those guys that could be a 4-down player in the NFL because you trust him in any situation. He can drop in coverage, he can blitz, he can play on special teams. So Pete Werner is a player that I know a lot of teams like, and I don't know that he makes it to the 4th round. Maybe somewhere in the 3rd is where he ends up coming off the board. And I'd probably throw Chaz Surratt in that mix as well as a day 2 player who teams are intrigued with. 6'2", 230, former quarterback. You don't really see that transition very often at the college level, where a player is a quarterback for 3 years, then moves to linebacker. And in 2 years at linebacker, he had 206 total tackles. So really impressive transition that he made. But there's still some areas where he needs to improve and get better and continue that transformation. But in the 3rd round, I think you feel comfortable taking that chance.
Assuming a guy like Terrace Marshall, I know there's some late word that maybe there's some injury concerns with him. Rashad Bateman, Elijah Moore, right? If those guys are gone by 42, I think you're probably pretty safe to wait on that next wideout, Dane. Who are some of the round 3, round 4 guys that you really like that could fall through the cracks and in such a deep class could still end up giving you starter caliber reps?
Yeah, I think it just depends on if you really like one of those guys that you don't think is going to fall to you in the 3rd round, like De'Ami Brown, for example, who I really like out of North Carolina.
I like him too.
He's the best double move receiver in this class. He's very skilled at double moves, and he wins downfield. His speed's outstanding. His tracking skills are outstanding. Needs to expand that route tree. Needs to improve some of the reliability issues just in terms of being a better finisher underneath. But if and maybe the Giants already have a guy like this, like with Darius Slayton, maybe he already fits that mold. So maybe De'Ami Brown in the 2nd round is a little rich. But if they did wait till the 3rd round, 4th round, then, because, and it's kind of like corners where there's just a sheer volume of players. Some of these guys are going to fall. A Tylan Wallace from Oklahoma State is a player that, all through the season, scouts are, 2nd round pick, not getting out of 2nd. But when we get here, to the week of the draft and, you stack these guys and there's so many players that someone has to fall. And so if Tylan Wallace were to fall to the 3rd round, that wouldn't be a huge surprise. Nico Collins from Michigan, he opted out. I think he hurt himself a little bit there, but a team could get really good value in the 3rd round with a Nico Collins, 6'4", 215, runs well. He's a guy that's, probably not going to be one of the top 10 receivers drafted this year. But it wouldn't be surprising if 5 years from now, we look at him as being one of the top 10 receivers from this class. So a really interesting player there. Once we get to the 4th round, that's where maybe a Simi Fehoko from Stanford comes into play. 6'4", 222 pounds, a guy that's going to help you on special teams right away. That's going to be something that is going to help him stand out to coaches, is what he can do on special teams coverages. And then as you work him into the offense, a big presence with his size. He's a guy that can win at the catch point. So there's a lot to like about his athleticism for a guy that size. And it doesn't stop. The depth of this wide receiver class, every single round, you're going to be able to find players that intrigue you in some way, some fashion. So I think we're going to see some teams wait until 3rd, 4th, maybe in the 5th round before they even feel comfortable addressing the wide receiver position.
Who are a couple day 3 running backs or tight ends if the Giants looking for some depth there? Ingram last year of his contract, Kyle Rudolph just a 2-year deal. Barkley coming off an ACL. Devontae Booker is the only other running back on the roster. The Giants want to add to those 2 spots, day 3, round 4, 5, 6. Who are some guys that you like that could fall in that area?
And a tight end, it's not really a great group this year after the top 5. We see Kyle Pitts go very early, obviously. And then on day 2, Pat Freiermuth, Brevin Jordan, Tommy Tremble, maybe Hunter Long gets in there. If Hunter Long were to fall to the 4th, then you jump all over that. But there's a good bet that he's going to be off the board. And then there's a little bit of a drop off. I don't know that, you feel great about any of these tight ends in the 4th round. Even in the 5th round, it's a little bit of a stretch. I'm a big Jacob Harris fan out of UCF, my top sleeper this year. He's even more of some teams have him on the board as a wide receiver because he is 6'5", 220, a little bit of a developmental prospect. Trey McKitty out of Georgia is one of those guys who could end up being a better pro than college player. 6'4", 246 pounds, runs well, not a ton of production. He was used, the way he was used really kept him from piling up numbers in the stat sheet. But, he goes to the Senior Bowl and he shows he can run downfield routes, and there's something more to him. So Trey McKitty could be an option once you get to the 5th round, 6th round. John Bates from Boise State, another one of those guys. Is going to help you out on special teams, 6'5.5", 250. Not a great athlete, but if you want a guy that you can trust as a blocker and also is going to give you a little bit of juice as a pass catcher, Bates in the 6th round would make some sense. And then at running back, it's kind of a similar conversation where there's guys at the top to get you excited. Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, both North Carolina running backs. I'm a big Kenneth Gainwell fan, but I'd maybe even throw Trey Sermon in that mix. After those top 6, a little bit of a drop off, and it really becomes, what type of back are you looking for? Are you looking for someone that has a little bit of juice, like a Khalil Herbert out of Virginia Tech? If you're looking for someone with a well-rounded skill set who can catch the ball out of the backfield, like a Javian Hawkins or a Chris Evans, Ramondre Stevenson. So there's different types of backs once you get to day 3. I don't know that any of them are going to knock your socks off and really impress you, but depending on what you're looking for, a Chuba Hubbard from Oklahoma State, another one of those speed guys where it's all predicated on acceleration with his game. If you're looking for maybe a player that can do a little bit of everything, Larry Roundtree, Missouri, 5'11", 212 pounds, can block, can take care of the football. He can catch a ball in the backfield. Just a guy that's dependable. And I think he's not the best athlete, but a lot of his strengths translate, talking about vision, patience, balance. So, guys that this running back class, not a ton of guys to get excited about, but definitely some guys who can come in and help you out, especially on sub packages.
All right, Dane, final question. Let's go 3 rounds deep. Let's have fun. Give me some giant predictions. We're less than a week away from the draft. Their first 3 picks in this draft.
All right. So starting at 11, I do think this is where I think ideally they go pass rusher here. And ideally speaking, I think they would love to go pass rusher and really boost up that position. I'm just, do they take a Kwity Paye that early? Do they take an Ojulari? I'm going to go Vera Tucker here, just because and maybe I'm allowing some of my own bias to leak in here, just because I think he's just such a good player, high floor player. I'm going to say Vera Tucker here. You plug him in at guard, and you strengthen your offensive line in a big way. 2nd round, say they go pass rusher, and which pass rusher is going to be there for them at that point. Maybe it could Boogie Basham be there for him? Let's just say that guys like Joe Tryon and Rousseau, say they're off the board. So let's go Boogie Basham there in the 2nd round for the Giants. They upgrade the pass rush. And then 3rd round, they could go back on the defensive line. They could go corner. Let's say Paulson Adebo, the corner from Stanford. I know they added Adoree Jackson, but keep upgrading in that secondary with a guy like Paulson Adebo. So let's go offense at 11 with Vera Tucker, and then address the pass rush with Boogie Basham at 42, and then in the 3rd round, we'll go Adebo at pick 76. I think that would make some sense for them. He's
Dane Brugler. He's the author of The Beast. Is the best draft guide out there, folks. You can get it with your subscription to The Athletic. Dane, thanks so much for the time. We appreciate it. Stay safe out there, my friend. Enjoy the home stretch here. We're almost there, man.
All right, you too. Thanks, John.
Dane Brugler from The Athletic. We thank him for joining us on the Giants Huddle podcast. Don't forget, you can find it on the Giants Podcast Network, presented by Investors Bank at giants.com/podcast, the Giants mobile app, your favorite podcast platforms. For Dane, I'm Schmeelk. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.